You're welcome, folks. This is Joint Justice Oversight Committee, and it is July 16th. This is our first meeting of this biennium and of this particular legislative session. We do meet about 6 times off session. We do not do a formal report to the legislature about our work, but we do make some recommendations either through sponsored legislation that both bodies can sponsor, or sometimes we even write letters to the appropriate standing committees in terms of requesting them to do further work on any particular issue that we might be looking into. So we don't do a formal report, but there is some action we can take. Also, we cannot take really any formal action per se off session unless it's being directed by session law or something that was put in to either a bill that came through Appropriations Committee or Institutions Committee on Services, unless there's a direction that was put in place for that. So any questions before we turn it over to Ben to walk us through what our charge is and our responsibilities for few meetings? Any questions? Okay, Ben, it's all yours.
Take it over. Well, good morning. Welcome back, everybody, if you have stayed away. This is meeting 1 of the Justice Oversight Committee for the 2025 interim. I will be your friendly neighborhood staffer for the summer. And briefly, sort of what my intro is to the committee every year is I do a small presentation going over the charge and then what is facing the committee for the summer. And so feel free to jump in with any questions you have along the way. But without further ado, I will dive in.
So Ben, before you get into the duties, we do need to do an election of the chair and vice chair. Open that up for us.
Well, that's sort of what I would, yeah. So just briefly going over the statutory charge, which acting chair Emmons briefly went over. This committee was established under in Title II, which governs the legislature, Chapter 23. There are only 2 statutes in that chapter. Sections 801 and 802, which establish the committee and then gives the committee its powers, which are to oversee the Department of Corrections, which was really a vestige of the initial iteration of the committee, which was to oversee corrections, but its charge has since been expanded as Representative Emmons discussed. So what that oversight of corrections includes is evaluating DOC's strategic, operating, and capital plans, their policy development, and really to encourage sort of collaboration and communication between DOC and really various agencies of the state and the criminal justice system. It also assists with the juvenile and criminal justice systems in the state, evaluates sort of the statewide administration of pretrial services, court diversion, community justice centers, and really other community-based rehabilitation programs throughout the state to assess the consistency and cost effectiveness of those programs and systems, and to ensure that the statutes that govern these programs reflect the state's restorative justice principles. Which is codified actually in Title 28, which is the corrections chapter, section 2A. It's the state's restorative justice policy statement. And then, as has been a highlight of recent years, reviewing the timeliness of judicial proceedings, most notably the court backlog these days. So that's really a general overview, but within those responsibilities is electing a chair, vice chair, and clerk. And it's also established by statute that the chair rotates between the Senate and the House each year. Now, we're in a little bit of a different sort of situation because last biennium, it was the Senate's term, and Senator Sears, who's traditionally been the chair, sadly passed away. And so the committee voted to elect Representative Emmons and instead, because tradition has been the vice chair is sort of from the House when the Senate is the chair and then vice versa. And even more traditionally, it's been really this chair of Senate Judiciary who has been either the chair or vice chair and then the chair of House Corrections Institutions that has acted as chair and vice chair. There really hasn't been any tradition or precedent when it comes to the clerk itself, but so that's sort of more of a debate, I suppose. But we find ourselves sort of in an odd situation that broke with convention because of what happened with Senator Sears last year, or last biennium rather. And so technically it is the House's turn this biennium. So I will leave that to the committee to discuss and
So we need to move forward on this before we really continue.
yeah.
So,
Well, I was here during the debate after the passing of Senator Sears, which was a huge loss. It still is. And Representative Emmons was vice chair, so she was elevated to the temporary position of chair. And I would like to nominate her to continue as chair for the next this biennium.
second. Any other nominations? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Good votes. So I would like to place a nomination for vice chair, Senator Lyons, Senate, and chair of the Health and Welfare Committee on the Senate side. Jenny really helped out last year, filling in the void we experienced after the loss of Senator Sears. As a real valid, important partner in the work that we did. I would nominate Senator Lyons as vice chair.
I'll second it.
Any further nominations? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those?
Thank you.
But now we
We'll all
really,
work together.
we do. Now we really do need a clerk. Open to nominations. What would be the role of the clerk? Would they have to really do anything or just be?
I mean,
We've never really done this. Had it before.
normally because it's a standing committee, normally the clerk records votes and submits them, but since we're off session, those powers don't really carry over, so to speak. I think it's more of just having another person in the line of succession, if you will, if, there's an absence for some reason.
Yeah, so, and I also see the clerk is important in informing any of the letters that we might send out.
To help Ben.
Help, yeah.
Sure.
So I'd open the floor for nominations for anyone that wants to volunteer. Don't all speak up at once.
I would nominate Representative Lalonde.
You get to sit up here.
Oh, well, that's great. Yeah, in that case,
Would you be willing to do it?
yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to help Ben on any letters.
Any other nominations? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Welcome, Martin.
Thank
You have to move now.
No, I should say yes.
Okay,
Okay,
we have our committee leadership for the next biennium.
so nobody gets lost or dies in the process.
Well, are there any questions about the charge of the committee before moving forward?
Just one, the third bullet under the first one. It says communication between GOC, the administrative branch, and the criminal justice. It's administrative branch, not legislative branch?
That's what it says in the statute. And it wouldn't be the legislative branch because you are a part of it. For me, my reading of it administrative is that it's sort of the administration. I think it probably should have been executive branch, but
Okay.
it's an imprecise term.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'll move forward then. So there are various reports due to the committee during the 2025 interim, and this is the first time since I've sat for the committee that there is actually no charge or no review that this committee is statutorily mandated to conduct over this summer. So, we just have, the committee just has reports to digest and assess, and then some priorities that if it wants to implement, it can. So the reports that are due, it would have been, there would have been one due from, Act 40 of 2023, which was the, Coordinated Justice Reform Advisory Council report. This council was established basically to kind of be the successor for justice reinvestment after CSG. The members of the committee, I think, made a recommendation in their previous report that their work, there wasn't a need for the work, essentially. And so that was repealed in S-109 this past year. And so there was no more report from this committee, due from the council to this committee. There is a firearm surrender order compliance working group report due from Act 64, also one from the VINE system, Victim Notification System Task Force, and then the post adjudication reparative working group update and report. This came from Act 180 of 24, which established the pre-charge diversion program along with this working group. So I'll get into the details of those reports unless there are any initial questions.
So those reports are gonna be due coming to us. We don't have to act on it.
Correct.
It's just reports that are. I would say, I'm not sure about the firearm surrender order, that's Judiciary Committee's world. But I know with the victim notification system, there was a lot of work that was done on the House Corrections and Institutions Committee, and a little bit. Did you folks do a little bit of work as well?
A little bit, I mean, it ended up on our miscellaneous judiciary.
Right, recommendation from us as well. So I think we would need to spend some time on that particular issue, not just get the report. And also for folks, as a reminder, last year we made a recommendation to the standing committees to really look at the victim notification system as a whole, because we were finding there were some issues with it in our work, our Justice Oversight Committee work last year. So that's one I think we're going to be spending some time in. I would also like members to sort of keep track of what issues you would like us to cover as Ben is going through this, because I want to spend some time just to see what issues folks want to work on so we can set up our subsequent agendas. There's a lot percolating out there, even though we may not statutorily have some charges. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do for this. So keep that in your mind, keep a list, and then we'll have a committee discussion. Yeah.
Okay, moving on. So moving to the first report, the firearm surrender order compliance working group. So just as a little background, this came out of S-109, the Judiciary Miscellaneous Bill, which mandated that the Attorney General put together this working group to develop a uniform process to ensure compliance with court orders to surrender firearms. The working group's goal was to examine the statutory policy changes to create that process and other supports needed to pursuant to those court orders, and to identify stable and reliable funding sources for additional resources needed. So that's sort of the impetus driving the working group in the report that you will see. That report is due in the fall, November 15th. A series of recommendations to not only this committee, but also to the committees on judiciary in both chambers. it needs to include a series of recommendations, a workable statewide compliance model that can be adapted to both the family and criminal divisions, ensuring accountability of respondents and defendants while addressing victim safety needs, and those of the plaintiffs. Also proper storage and return of firearms, pursuant to those court orders. And then any recommendations for legislative changes necessary to support that model. So that is what will be forthcoming from the working group by November. And typically how it's gone is that there might be one more meeting in December of the committee to kind of assess and maybe issue any letters or any directives from this committee for the forthcoming session.
Is there any work, I'm gonna look to Martin and Bob, is there any work that we need to do prior to getting this report to understand the background?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Teresa?
I'm just wondering, in addition to the stuff that Ben is going over now, we did have a letter or two last year that went out, and maybe you're going to cover that. I'm just wondering if there was any progress on the recommendations that we made to the other standing committees.
So we did one on victim notification. We did one on home detention, which we didn't do any work on per se because it was so complicated. And what was?
And then there was a series of recommendations. If you give me a moment.
Yeah,
Later.
yeah,
we
that's
can-
fine. I just am sort of putting it in the queue to
Mhm.
see if there is an update on that.
And that's something that, maybe after I could circulate those letters to the committee, so you have them and as a reference point and also as a discussion point.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the next report, the Victim Notification System Task Force, which also came from the Judiciary Miscellaneous Bill. It was created to improve the responsiveness of the victim notification system, to improve victims' accessibility to information, ensuring that the notification process is trauma informed, expanding the use of automated notifications, and maximize the communication choices for those victims, and then recommendations for necessary training and resources. This report is due again also on November 15th in the form of proposed legislation to this committee, and then also to House Corrections, House Judiciary, Senate institutions, and Senate Judiciary. And as a
I just was gonna, when you're finished, finish and I'll ask it.
Sure, and just as a, I guess, reminder, so last year, this is now the second year that this committee has sort of explored this issue. Last summer, there was a lot of testimony, I think, in the session before House Corrections, just really about the clunkiness, I think, to put it nicely, of the system. But a lot of that clunkiness made it so people weren't getting informed of, say, earn time reductions. So people that were sentenced, that were serving their sentences, but were earning good time to achieve time off of that sentence. And victims are supposed to be informed when that occurs, and that wasn't happening. So there was a user interface issue, I think, with understandability, but also not knowing that these perpetrators were being released early. Has some obvious issues, I think, that were testified to by the victims and the Center for Crime Victim Services. And so this was explored. There was a series of recommendations that also informed, there was earn time that was explored last year too. And these recommendations were sort of intertwined in the sense that the committee decided not to expand earn time until the Vine system was cleaned up. And so that was explored this past session, and now you see sort of a more focused working group on what needs to be fixed. So that will be coming to you in the fall.
So just, can you remind us who is on that working group?
Yes, I can. But it would be the usual suspects off the top of my head. Oh, I have it right here. So it's the Commissioner of Corrections or his designee, The executive director of the Center for Crime Victim Services are designees, so that would be Jennifer Pullman. The executive director for the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs are designee, which would be Tim Leaders Dumont or his appointee. A member appointed by the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, the Victim Services Director at the Vermont State Police, and 2 people who are either victims or survivors of victims appointed by the Center for Crime Victim Services, and a member appointed by the Commissioner of Corrections who's familiar with the VINE system. So those two involved.
So we'll do some background in terms of what the VINE system is, because that's through DOC that they contract with. There's also issues within the state's attorney's world as well, and working with victims on that end, with their victim advocates while the case is working through the courts, and how that notification system works. And then when a person does become sentenced, then they kick over to the VINE system and some things fall apart in between. And that's what we're trying to get our hands around for that. And that's what the task force is going to really be looking at. So next meeting, we can schedule in some of the players here to go to talk about what's currently in place and where some of the issues are. That makes sense, because it's really pretty complicated in some ways.
And one of the discussion points last year was the committee was maybe separating the 2 systems for pre-adjudication and post-adjudication. So that was another topic of discussion that we had.
Because a VINE system is for post adjudication. It's when someone is sentenced and it runs through DOC, they contract it out.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Moving to the post-adjudication reparative working group. So this is really a 2-year process that came out of Act 180 of 2024. This working group is aimed to create a post-adjudication reparative program to promote uniform access to appropriate community-based service providers for individuals sentenced to reparative boards and probation pursuant to the statutes that govern those sentencing alternatives. This is the way to kind of think about this is you had pre-charge diversion that was established that came out of this act. And there was initially a lot of discussion about creating sort of a post-adjudication equivalent that would focus on reparative work, victim engagement, things like that. And then seeing the enormity of creating such a program, this working group was created to really work at this issue for 2 years. And one of the charges of the committee is also, or of the working group, is to create a reliable funding structure. You're going to see a theme a little bit of that in these working groups this year. And you'll see that there's a series of updates and reports. So January 15th of last year, the group provided an update to the appropriate committees concerning any progress. I believe that they just submitted their July report update a few days ago, giving some updates on the progress here. And then their ultimate report will come in November in the form of proposed legislation to this committee and then the various standing committees on what's recommended to create this program.
So we should get a copy, just to bring the committee up to speed. We should get a copy of what they reported their update from January 15th. We should receive that. And that could be our starting point before we get into the July 15th, which was yesterday. So we're probably going to be dealing with that till our next meeting. So.
So moving on, sort of some considerations that were floated in the lead up to this meeting about non-statutory priorities to review. One is the pre-charge diversion program, which is going to be discussed this afternoon a little bit from my understanding. The treatment of non-justice involved minors, juvenile facility updates, the current treatment and status of those justice involved folks. The update on the women's correctional facility, a mandatory reporter statute review, justice reinvestment, and the perennial question of the court backlog.
There's one that I didn't send in, the one I did send in, but, so at some point, going back over, the healthcare and the status of healthcare within the EOC. A lot of work has been done, particularly with regard to substance use disorder. And now I think we need to continue with that and with mental health. So just at some point, that would be great. Teresa?
Since we're adding to things that we want to do in the future, or later in the session, I would like to get an update on the Corrections Monitoring Commission that sunsetted essentially around the sexual misconduct at the women's prison. To see what exactly is happening now, what can we learn from that? Do we need to reinstate it? What processes do we have in place?
With respect to the juvenile, we have the juvenile facility update. I broadened that to the juvenile justice system, keeping on top of raise the age. And we postponed that to July of 27, but I think we need to keep hearing from them. And specifically, it's not just an issue of the facility, it's accountability is what really came up in the several weeks we went into juvenile justice. Accountability specifically for the older age group, 18, which is in right now. And until we can figure out appropriate accountability for 18-year-olds, it seems we're going to continue to postpone the 19-year-olds. So I'd have that part in there. A couple other things that already is too long a list probably. But work crew, just getting an update on what's going on with work crew. And this one's really one that I just need to work with Senator Lyons on, and that's competency to stand trial. And it's the issue of what happens with an individual who's found incompetent to stand trial. There's a number of issues. It's not really competency restoration I'm talking about, but we need to look at what happens when an individual is found incompetent to stand trial.
Right. We'll have to have DMH and the judiciary.
Alice, can you see my hand?
No, I can't. Well, now I can. Yes. Chopper and then Teresa.
All right. We talked quite a bit last year, and we had people come in from the Corrections Department in terms of making sure that the people that are in the facility get the right medications and they get them at the proper time, and et cetera. And then when they're leaving the facility, that they're set up in the community that they're going to, so that there's no break in them taking the medications. And I thought that the new company there was going to report to us on how they're doing with that, because it was a big problem.
Right. Well, that's a good reminder, Topper. I know my committee did a lot of work on this, trying to streamline it better. The bill ended up not going anywhere in the committee, so we can get updates on that.
Okay.
Teresa?
I just want to tack on to one of the things that Martin said with regard to the juvenile justice and the older age group in that. And that's the impact of the interstate compact on the numbers of individuals and what happens with those folks pending transfer back to a home state. And then nobody has brought it up, which I'm kind of surprised about, but I think we should hear about what's going to happen with the ICE contract.
I was saving that one.
Oh.
Well, I think the whole issue of ICE immigration And then there's some costs associated with that within our DOC and our system. That's a huge topic, I think that, well, it's a complex topic.
It's complex, yeah.
So I think it does sort of, it is important. I read it down 3 times, so, yeah.
And as a reminder, that there is a contract in place and it's effective until August 20th. Around that time. This year, it is up to the 5th floor, not DOC, to negotiate, renegotiate, or not do another contract with ICE.
So then we should hear from the 5th floor.
Should. The problem is.
It uses our correctional facilities, that's.
Right, and the issue is if the current contract expires around the 20th of August, do we have a meeting prior to that? In August?
Well, I guess we'll talk about that later.
Well, yeah, for me, there's a lot there, I mean, including is there any restorative, anything involved with that, with this system? Or is it just a place to put people and then send them out later? And the money piece becomes important. Who's paying for it? Federal government is, and then what does that do to our current contracts? I don't know anything about the contracts, so.
And I was just gonna say, I understand the, potential issues, but if we are at least, if we're the only body legislatively that's in session during the recess, at which time that the contract expires and is, I'm sure, being renegotiated or whatever, decisions are being made now. And it would seem odd if we didn't at least get an update on what the potential is and, raise whatever questions that we might have.
So we do have DOC in the room.
Senator Sheen just raised his hand.
Pardon?
Senator Sheen just raised his hand.
Thanks, Ben.
Nodder?
Yeah, just wanted to chime in and follow up what I think it was Teresa who was just mentioning. I do think it's worthwhile that we hear from DOC about the impacts of the contract as it's being negotiated, even though it is something that's going to be decided by the 5th floor. I'd like to hear what the stats are, the costs, and what the future might look like with that contract.
So DOC is scheduled next to do an update. Would you be able to touch this issue a little bit? Give us. I'm sure.
But only because you asked me.
Anything else? Well, that expands our workload quite a bit, which is good.
And this is just a little reminder of what's due for the year or the summer and fall.
Anything else for Ben before we move on to DOC updates? Okay, thank you, Ben. The warehouse. The warehouse. So Megan, there's more documents that came out from DOC. You're having some copies made, but they're also they're posted to our webpage. Correct? Yeah. I want to give them time because I know the ICE situation, the ICE request just came in. So I want to give DOC some time to do what they need to do. Can we get started with some of the other updates from DOC? Who's coming? We have this document. I know you have this document. So maybe we could start with that and then they will get expanded and then we can go into the ICE conversation. Do you want to start with that conversation?
Let's warm you up a little first.
So welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
If you both could introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Nick Demlin, I'm the Commissioner of Corrections for the state of Vermont.
Hi, I'm Jessica Kingmore, Director of Research and Data Analytics with the DOC. You can call me Jess.
So unless you have questions to start, we thought we would walk you through some of our population data. We can go deeper on any parts of this that are interesting to you, but really wanted to give you kind of a baseline of where we're at, flag for you that we've seen a pretty precipitous increase in our population, kind of across the board. And we'll dig into a little of that. Happy to talk. I know it's not on the agenda for today, but happy to talk about staff numbers as well, or at least put those out there for your awareness. You won't see them in the packet. And then we can pivot to the ICE topic and anywhere else you want to go. But I'll maybe hand it over to Jess unless you guys have specific things you want to flag at the beginning.
We flag them.
Okay,
Or someone else comes up with some items.
that's never happened before.
Oh, yeah,
That would be a first goal. All right, go ahead.
Okay. So I brought some data for you all today, as I like to do. So I can also, for those of you who don't know me, which is a decent amount in the room, I think, my team's responsible for all data analytics and reporting for the Department of Corrections, as well as facilitating academic research. And so we prepare a lot of the data that you've seen the commissioner present, as well as maintain internal, external reporting. And so the data I prepared for you is kind of centered on just our incarcerated population, dissected a few different ways. And so this first figure that you're seeing is our total incarcerated male population. That would include everyone who's housed in our 6 in-state correctional facilities, as well as those housed out of state in Mississippi. And so just orienting you to what you're seeing here, we started in 2021 because that's when kind of like the post-COVID everything started kind of ramping back up. And so, you know, before that, there was a huge dip as a result of COVID and just systems kind of shutting down.
So do you remember what the numbers were pre-COVID?
We're almost there again. We're about like within 100, I want to say. We have some graphics. Yes, Isaac's already is on it. There you go. So that shows pre to through COVID and post. So that starts in 2018. And if you notice, we're kind of going back up to where we were. I guess it's like within 200.
So in 2018, is it the top, is the top line?
Yes, the dash line is
That's the
total
And that is
for male
for-
and female.
And that was
That was at
1694. Okay. And then the male population was 1554.
1555 for total. So yeah, we're within 140 of where we were in 20, like based on where we were from 2018.
And then for the women back in 2018.
We're actually higher. In 2018, it was 138 and now we're at 155.
So just might be helpful. I know some of you spend a lot of time working with our system, some not as much. So the correction system in Vermont's unique. We have a unified system, meaning we have both sentenced and detained folks. But we have some other folks in our system too. So I just want to clarify the terms for you all. So we have detainees or detainers. Those are folks who are awaiting trial, but who are held in our custody. In most states or jurisdictions, they'd be held in like a county jail, a local jail, but in Vermont, we don't have those. Everybody comes to the state system. We have sentenced individuals. So those are folks who have been convicted of a crime at the state level here in Vermont. They're in our system serving a period of incarceration. When they're in that period of incarceration, they may be eligible for furlough, which we're not going to talk a lot about today. They may become eligible for parole at some point. We're not going to talk a lot about that today. And then folks can have split sentences, so they may also have a probation sentence. We won't talk a lot about that today. In addition to the state incarcerated folks, so folks waiting for trial on a state crime or folks sentenced on a state crime, we also hold federal detainees. And right now we have 2 primary types of federal detainees. Those that are awaiting trial in a federal court in Vermont. So those are criminal defendants awaiting trial, kind of like our state detainees. those are held by us, but for the United States Marshal Service. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. And then the other group are folks who are held on an immigration detainer. Those are ICE detainees. We'll talk about those in a minute. And those two groups are somewhat distinct also. But in aggregate, they make up these population numbers that we're going to talk about. And we'll parse some of that out. But if you have questions about that as we go, we can dig in a little deeper.
So the first graph that you showed us was annual total incarcerated males.
Yes.
So is that detainees and
This
senators?
would be every male in our system.
So that
is incarcerated.
includes federal marshals
Correct.
and ICE.
Correct. But one other caveat I have about the federal numbers is we have a contract with the United States Marshal Service, and that contract is capped. And they're pretty much always close to their cap.
And what's the cap?
I think it's 80, and they've usually been running in the 70s. And that's because there's far more individuals who are awaiting trial in Vermont than we have capacity to hold for the federal government. So we hold about 80, and that's to get the folks who are closest to their trial dates or need to be close to the court to move back and forth easily. But everybody else, the Marshal Service moves all over the Northeast and usually quite far away. So the federal number remains almost universally consistent because they're always convicted.
So once they go to federal court and receive a sentence, they're no longer housed within our correctional facilities.
That's right. They actually leave the Marshal Service custody and they move into the Federal Bureau of Prisons custody. We don't have any of those facilities in Vermont. There is one in New Hampshire, but they moved anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, it's a follow-up to, you've hit most of what I was wondering about, but I'm looking at the detainee population. And so am I to understand that of that, the 523 most recent data, that approximately 80 of those are Marshal Service detainees?
It'd be a little less because that's just the male population. So I don't know if you have the
Oh.
Fed breakdown.
I don't
Usually
have
it's,
it, yeah.
10-ish women.
Yeah, for primary federal, I mean, female of all of the federal detainers, it's like, they make up like 18 or 20%. It's like it's a much lower number for the female population. I don't have it at the top of my head.
So your question, if we have 504 detainees that are male, of those, probably approximately 50 to 60 would be
Yeah.
federal detainees.
And does that include the ICE detainees?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're talking about the 80 cap, that's ICE and federal
Kind of. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to really understand what the 523.
The ICE number is extremely variable because they're often with us for a very short period of time. So their number changes it does change daily in a way that the Marshal's number remains relatively steady. There might be one in or one out, but they were always kind of in that area. The 80 is really a cap on the Marshal Service, not ICE. But ICE's numbers have also remained relatively steady. We saw a kind of a blip up when the new administration took office, and then it's kind of steadied out again.
Yeah, and part of the reason I'm trying to understand this is to understand if we're having a larger detainee population.
Right.
Because we are holding more people either on bail or, just state detainees.
So the primary driver of the increase in detainee population is not a result of the federal detainers, either Marshals or ICE. We did see an increase, but we're talking in the single digits for women, low double digits for men. And we're talking about a system of 1,600 people. So it's not moving the needle there significantly. Where we think the primary driver of the increase in population is on state detainees,
Okay.
some state sentenced, but primarily on the detainee side of the equation.
Okay, on that side of the equation, are you able to provide a breakdown on how many individuals are being held on bail, that they're unable to pay their bail, and the number of individuals who are held without bail, that they.
Yeah, so Jess can get into the specifics of that. The challenge for bail is a court function, not a corrections function. So that data is actually owned by the courts, not by DOC. So we get a MIT from the court that says you will hold this person until something, either hold them forever until we tell you not to, or hold them until they pay their bail or whatever. But the DOC data doesn't cleanly capture that. maybe on a date.
Well, I guess I'm confused by it because I'm pretty sure I've seen reports from DOC that actually I can see even the amount of money that they're being held on bail for.
We have the data. It actually, I found out it also gets like written over when someone leaves because it's not. We have no reason to capture data long-term for this function. Because it's literally just letting our correctional officers and our facilities know until this person meets bail, you have to hold them or they're held without bail. The first part of your question is pretty much impossible for us to answer of people who are held for bail they can't afford, right? We have no idea what somebody can afford.
No, the
So
question is that
yeah.
they're held, they have bail imposed and they're being held, meaning they haven't paid it for whatever reason.
yes,
I don't care whether it's well, I do, but for the purpose, whether they just don't feel like.
You want to know the total percent of our population who's in on bail versus held without bail pending trial.
Yeah, I think that would be important to understand that as a trend as well, and that's relative to a statute change from last year where we've changed being held on bail.
we have done that and we do it point in time. And so we can provide that. And what that answers is at that moment, these are the people. They're literally 10 minutes after I pull the report, someone could have made bail.
Sure.
So, but we do have that. And then there's a separate one that we don't really talk about that much. We have held without bail. We have people who have bail amounts. And then there's also released responsible party, which it's a small subset, but it is important to know that like that requires an external factor as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have, I know it's a point in time, but is there any way to tell trends on that? Do you have past point in times that you've looked at and we can compare it?
Yeah, I don't know the percentages off the top of my head, but usually a larger proportion are held without bail. And that kind of correlates to the other trend that we see in our facilities where whether detained or sentenced, they're usually charged with a serious felony crime. And so a lot of times, as you can imagine, those types of crimes get correlated with being held without bail.
Right,
So we see a larger proportion, male and female population both, that are held without bail than having bail amounts.
So if we could get that data, that would be helpful. Sure, thank you.
Because I have seen that data.
It's difficult,
And it's,
it's not something we're doing regularly, so we can do it kind of at request.
We do have the ability to pull that data to Jesse and Commissioner's point. You know, it's not, we are not the stewards of that data, nor do we control Odyssey. We pull it from Odyssey and from the paperwork we receive from the court. So, you know, we're really not the custodians of that system. Ergo, questions would be better directed to the courts, but we can pull that from our records.
so Jenny,
Ben has his hand.
Thanks.
Jenny, and then what did Ben first?
Yeah, just to remind the committee too, what you might be remembering too is the criminal justice investments and trends report that was released last year by CRG, which contained this exact data point. But it's produced once every 3 years, so that'll next be produced in 2027. So just to give the committee some context and maybe the source of those figures.
And they're better apt to present on that because they actually can pull from Odyssey, whereas we're getting it on NITS. So it's different.
Jenny, and one thing.
Okay, first, before I go to the questions, I want to elaborate a little bit on the competency piece because our committee did spend quite a bit of time on competency restoration this session, and we worked with DMH. I think you came into committee. I can't remember if you were in committee on that or not. But Ben, I was thinking that competency restoration is a huge area, and it gets to exactly what Martin was talking about, where folks who cannot achieve competency to stay in trial. And then how do we restore that if at all possible? And I know that Tennessee has a program that is very expensive, but perhaps we could talk about that at some point, just to see what DMH has to say. We asked for a report. We've asked for several reports on this, so, yeah. I guess I want to go back to the ICE and immigration issue, and knowing that the things that we hear in the press, of course, influence us greatly. And when we hear about a contract being written and what does that mean for placing people in our facilities, and are families being separated? What's the number of women who are there? What about kids? Do we have any kids in the state of Vermont who have been placed in care and then moved somewhere else with or without parents? Does the contract include, will it include, and does the current contract include anything about healthcare or care of people from the human side? So that's a question that perhaps you could answer now, or just give me a clue, but when the fifth floor negotiates this, I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the outcome is, it's important when they are part of the Vermont system that we take care of them appropriately.
Yeah, okay, maybe you seem very interested in ICE, so maybe we'll give you just a couple of minutes on ICE and then we can go back to some of the data. So I don't want to talk too much about the contract, because I don't want to get too far forward on our skis. I'll tell you mechanically kind of how it works, and then I'll tell you what's been happening with ICE detainees in our system, and then if you have follow-ups, I can try to address them. We have an agreement, we call them contracts, we're using that term a little loosely, but we have an agreement with the US Marshal Service to house federal detainees. As part of that agreement, through the Marshal's Service agreement with us, the Bureau of Prisons and ICE may also detain individuals in our system. BOP, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, has never done it as far as I'm aware. Where that might happen is if somebody is already a federal sentenced individual in the Bureau of Prisons and has another trial in Vermont for a federal crime, they may come here under the Marshal's auspices, but through BOP. It hasn't happened, I don't think, since I've been the commissioner, and I wouldn't worry too much about that. That's pretty run-of-the-mill criminal process. The ICE issue, so historically, Vermont's had an agreement with ICE to house immigrant, alleged illegal border crossers and things for a long, long time. And historically, they were low numbers. They came for 72 hours or so. They left. The ICE would move them on. They'd present in front of an immigration judge, and the immigration judge would decide what would happen. Usually, I think the pathways are they get released with a date to appear in the future at immigration court, and they're off on their own doing whatever, or they were sent for further detention at a bigger immigration detention facility. There's a big one in New York City or in the New York area. There's some in other parts of the country. They'd be moved off there. Those folks historically were people who were arrested in Vermont by the Border Patrol and brought to our facility for allegedly illegal crossing. Some of those folks would be then charged with a federal crime, and they move over to the Marshal side, and they become federal criminal detainees. That's pretty small. I mean, that would be like if they were arrested crossing the border carrying a bunch of cocaine with them, in addition to whatever immigration thing is going to go on. Now they're being charged with drug trafficking. But again, that number is quite small. So for the folks who were just going through an immigration process, they would come to us, and that the process I just described would happen. What we've observed change a little bit is the lengths of stay are getting a little longer. We have some data to support that. So instead of 72 hours, maybe they're staying 5 days or so. They're still being taken out periodically for what we think are immigration hearings, so presentation in front of an immigration judge or other things, whatever federal process they're going through. And then they're moved on somewhere else. And we lose sight of what happens after that point. We're also seeing, though, folks being brought to Vermont who weren't arrested here, and that was a change in trend. So that's most pronounced with the female population. We see female immigrant detainees being brought from Boston or other areas. We suspect, though we don't know for sure, that that's because there are very few immigration beds available for females in the Northeast region, Vermont being one of the only places that actually does have beds for females. So instead of transporting somebody to the South, Georgia, for example, I know there's an immigration facility in Atlanta, they bring them here because they're trying to keep it close and it's easier for their logistics. That's our best guess of what's happening. Then we also had individuals, we've had a few kind of high profile cases where they were brought through the Vermont district, so the federal district in Vermont. And while they were here in ICE custody, not necessarily with us, a lawsuit was filed And a court in Vermont has issued, a federal court in Vermont has issued a temporary restraining order ordering them to stay in Vermont, in which case ICE has very few options for detention in Vermont other than our system. And so they were brought to us. And we've had a few of those cases over the last couple of months. Those are kind of the big changes and trends. We've seen a slight uptick in the number of detainees, but it's not astronomical. And if you look back over time, ICE has had these blips of detainee numbers under both Democratic and Republican administrations. And so it's hard for us to say with the data, the amount of data we have now, which is pretty small, whether this is an ongoing trend, whether this is one of those blips. You know, it's just kind of hard. We can read the news and conjecture, but we don't really know. I know you asked about healthcare. One of the things that I think attracts folks to the Vermont system is we have a robust healthcare system. And so we provide ICE detainees and federal criminal detainees with basically every advantage that we would provide to anybody else in our system. So they get full access to healthcare. They have historically not been with us for very long. So 72 hours isn't a long time to get them any of or all of the healthcare needs they may have. But now that we're keeping folks for 3 to 5 days, we give them they get more access to healthcare, let's say. So maybe I'll pause there. I'm sure there's other questions, but I wanted to kind of give that primer and we can pick it up from there.
At some point, it'd be helpful to understand what the agreement actually says. I know it's in a process right now. And an agreement has run out and it was different from what we're probably seeing in the future, but it would be helpful to know some of the conditions that are included.
Yeah, we think, sorry, one other thing I would just add to your point, Senator, is I think our primary objective, we're putting the politics aside of the whole thing. Our primary objective is to make sure that these folks who come to us have shelter, they have health care, they have access to lawyers, and they have access to the courts, and that we can ensure as best we can, like we would do for any state detainee, any federal detainee, that they're getting due process under law. And I think that's something that we feel strongly about and that we've been able to deliver for these folks.
So I know we got some questions here. Wendy was in the queue. I don't know. If it's
I was in the.
Ben, you wanting to weigh in on what?
Well, no, I'm just saying, I could give an overview of the current. But it's your prerogative.
Let's go through the questions first. So Wendy was in the queue.
Right, but I had a non-ICE.
Okay, so let's poll Teresa and then Martin.
Okay, so I want to make sure I'm looking at the data that you're presenting in an accurate way. So, you know, when I look at the average total detained population, and then I look at the, you know, monthly that's up there on the board right now, and it looks like it goes out through June or so. It looks like there's a very substantial portion of the detainees who are federal. Is that?
I can speak to that because these are showing two very different things, which is why they're like two different graphics. So this is just like unique individual lodgings is what you're seeing here. The other one actually takes all of our daily population counts and averages them across the year. And so I can say that just like we have a cap with the US Marshals, we've established, I don't know if it's in writing or anything, but there are caps we put in with ICE. And so since 2023, we've never seen more than 22 males at any given time and 11 females. That's on a day. Now, but what can happen is they can always take those 22 out and bring 22 new people in on the same day. So that's what things with
That would be 44 lodges on that day.
on that
Right,
day. But
but-
at any given time, they're using only 22 beds.
The system isn't experiencing 44 people in at once.
Correct.
It's experiencing 22, but in a day, in a 24-hour period, you may have seen kind of 44 individuals. at any
I mean, so it's accurate to say that the lodgings have increased fairly substantially, but not necessarily the average daily.
Right, so we weren't collecting data on ICE detainees particularly well because it hadn't really ever been an issue for us. We started because we needed to understand what the trends were. So the historical average daily ICE count, so number of ICE detainees we have in our system is 12. So it's 12.
And that's like a
Male and female?
Yep. And so Jess had mentioned the highest number we've ever had for males was 22 in a single day. And what was it for females? Is that
11.
11.
And that's been since 2023, this one. Yeah, this goes
So
back.
today we have 19 ice holds, so we're running higher than average, but and the average will probably tick up slightly as we get more data. But we're not talking about huge numbers of folks in our system at any given time. And so when we go back to the other data we were looking at, that's why we're saying it's not moving this needle significantly. This is being driven largely by something else, and this is a kind of an ancillary data. It's
Ancillary, but contributing.
contributing,
Yeah.
but in a smaller,
Smaller
yeah, when you think about the total size of our system.
Yeah, as far as bed counts, not really contributing.
Those smaller numbers may be putting a lot more pressure on your system.
Well, that's another consideration is the operational impact of if you have 44 individuals move through a facility in one day, that's a big impact. Even if it's not reflected in the day, like it might not change our average. That's a lot of, particularly for those who have been or are aware, our Northwest Correctional Facility in St. Albans is our primary male detention facility in the northwest part of our state. It's also the primary facility that holds federal and ICE detainees. And that booking area is smaller than, well, it's like half the size of this room. So you imagine moving 44 people through there in 24 hours, that's a lot of movement. And those are just ICE detainees. We haven't even gotten to the federal detainees or state detainees who are going to move through there in that same time period.
And possibly most would, right? Which just makes the process a little longer.
We have Martin and Nodder.
I think most of my questions were answered, but I just want a clarification on the graph on page 13, which is monthly. So approximately what I'm looking at is there were 300 separate individuals who were lodged during that particular month of April. Is that how I'm to read that?
Monthly cumulative. So it's, on every day, let's say today we said we had 19, tomorrow we, another 20. It's just counting every day the number of lodgings on that day, not just unique individuals. You might have someone who's, there for multiple days,
So it's not
maybe
300.
counted each day.
Oh,
It's not 300 individuals, it's 300.
300, yeah. 300 lodgings.
Yeah, okay, fine, thank you.
Nodder?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Wanted to follow up on a previous statement about access to attorneys. So right now, do all of these detainees have the ability and the opportunity to make a phone call out to speak with their immigration attorney or to find, excuse me, or to find an immigration attorney?
They have the same access to attorney phones and the tablet system that other detainees have. I think we have been working on evaluating, making sure that folks have the ability to find an attorney. As you're aware, Senator, criminal defendants have access to attorneys in a different way than immigrant detainees were, and we want to make sure that there's tools, mechanisms for them to access lawyers. So that is something we're working on, but they have the same access to the phone lines, the same resources are available at their disposal.
Okay. And if if pro bono volunteer attorneys wanted to call in to assist, would they be able to identify or locate and differentiate from other detainees in order to, do this pro bono work if they wanted to?
Yeah, so we have had attorneys ask and do some of that work, and certainly we facilitate that when lawyers either know that a client or a potential client is in there and want to make contact with them or want to visit the facility. We have enabled those visits. There is still, I think, some more work to be done in that space to try to coordinate some of that work, because I think what the gap that exists for this population is they don't know who to contact, and the lawyers on the outside don't know who's in. Whereas like in the criminal, on the criminal side, somebody's presented at arraignment, at minimum at that point, they're going to be connected with a lawyer, whether it's their own lawyer or a public defender or a private lawyer who has a contract with the public defender's office. That same process doesn't exist on the immigration side. So we're trying to work through and make sure that resources are available to the individuals so that they can make those connections.
Thank you.
So while we're on the topic of ice, I'm gonna cut to the chase. What do you know, if anything, about the fifth floor renegotiating a contract going forward after August 20th?
Yeah, so I think those conversations are ongoing. I don't have a lot of details on where that will sugar off, but certainly we're aware that the contract is expiring and working through those options.
So would other facilities outside of St. Albans and the women's facility be impacted if there was an increase in ice holds?
Well, it certainly has reverberating effects through our system whenever our numbers increase, regardless of why. But generally not. So I think there's a couple of things. One, we don't anticipate having more than what we have now because we couldn't really sustain it even if we were interested in that. So I don't think there'll be higher numbers. I don't think that if we maintain the way we are right now, I don't think that you'll see major impacts in other facilities, to try to answer your question. And honestly, say the ICE contract went away for whatever reason and we dipped down to just having federal criminal defendants and then our own, it also probably wouldn't majorly impact. I mean, there might be a little relief in the booking area at Northwest, maybe some other areas, but it wouldn't impact the rest of the system either.
And to the commissioner's comment, so there's a dashboard that we keep track of ice. And you kind of see it in the graph on the page you had referenced, but we've seen ebbs and flows for ice. And so like, if you want like an idea of unique numbers, like we actually, our highest peak of unique individuals we saw when looking since 2023 happened in October, which you kind of see the blip on that graph. At actually, 175 individuals that
That
month.
was October of 23.
Of 23. And we haven't seen that high this entire year as of late, but the graph the trend line of that graph is identical when you look at unique individuals. It's just different numbers. But you see how you have these ebbs and flows. And so we've definitely seen this number, like peaks like this before. And another example is in the month of June, we had a total number of 62 individuals that came through our system, male, female.
Which is very consistent with previous months under previous.
Correct. So it kind of does have a natural ebb and flow.
A lot of what's driving that increase is the length of stay. So it's not the number of individuals. What you see that recent spike is that the commissioner's comment. These are folks who are staying instead of 72 hours or sometimes often it was 48 hours. Now these are folks staying 5 days. So that's why you see that daily census is higher, but the number of unique individuals might not be as high.
And the problem with measuring, the problem we found, as we dig deeper, we find all these problems with data. The problem with the length of stay data is for somebody who has a temporary restraining order by the US court that they must stay in Vermont. Now they're staying with us for as long as the court keeps them incarcerated. And so many of those folks are staying 30 days, 45 days. And so those numbers are spiking up. But ultimately, that's what that individual wanted. They don't want to be taken out of the US District of Vermont. So, the data isn't telling a perfect picture of all that's happening.
Just a follow-up question on, so I think to have a better picture of this, it would be helpful to understand maybe on a monthly basis, the number of unique individuals who are being processed through the system.
Yeah, so we've just recently built that ability. So we have those. We haven't published them yet because we've been kind of workshopping it, but we certainly can do that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Thanks.
Teresa.
More just a comment that, if you're showing at 142% oversubscribed in the system. So while they're, not the only cause, every, additional person adds to that issue. And so, I was referencing your comment about not sure if there is a limit or not. I would hope that DOC, in whatever input that you have into what the fifth floor is doing, would be advocating for specific limits on whether it's the number at any one particular point in time or the number of, days of lodging or, whatever it might be, because it all adds up and adds to the stress on the system.
Sure.
So more of a comment than question.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, now I do have a nice question.
Oh, but no, we're going back to.
So, regarding the ability of folks to find an attorney. So I have heard of quite a few attorneys who want to be helpful,
Mhm.
as you were saying.
Mhm.
So, do you know how many are not able to find an attorney? And
I don't know off the top of my head. We are working with groups that specifically do that work to try to figure out the best way forward. And we don't have a formal plan yet, but that work is underway.
okay, and I expect you're working quickly on
Yeah,
this, right?
yeah, absolutely.
It's been a quick turn on all things ice.
Yeah.
I actually created a dashboard with my team in one day for the commissioner.
Oh, wonderful.
It was insane. So
Good.
we are responding very quickly to these requests and trying to understand everything.
Terrific. And do you need help with translation?
I would say translation services, language access services are, in my opinion, the hardest part of this to solve so far.
Okay,
In part because I would have expected naivete coming into this, but I would have expected there was a finite number of languages we need to solve for. We need 5 languages, the kind of 5 most common. We have folks who are speaking 80 different languages. And so it's not just, if we could get a Spanish translator, or we could get a Russian translator, we would solve for a lot of different pathways to try to solve that. There's some work being done with the Office of Racial Equity on language access, but also we've been meeting with technology companies to see if there's tools we can put in the units that, my primary concern, I want to solve for, language access between a client and their attorney. That's important. But I also need to solve for what happens when the person's having a medical emergency and they can't communicate that to the officer because they're speaking 2 different languages. How do we need like tactical on the ground solutions, and then we need these broader solutions. Phone, if I want to call my attorney, who's translating that for me? It's been a very complicated problem to try to get our hands around, but we're trying to hit it from a couple of different ways. And the state does have language access resources available. We're just, like anything else, and Chair Emmons knows this well, trying to retrofit a solution into a correctional facility makes it 10 times harder. So we're working through that.
There's limited, there's no Wi-Fi and there's no self-service. So some of those technological solutions you might think would be apparent are less workable inside of.
Right, like you could throw a tablet down on the table, an officer and the incarcerated person could sit next to each other, and Google Translate could do the language translation for them. But we don't have Wi-Fi and we don't have self-service. So that doesn't work anymore. So now how do you get a downloadable solution? And it just becomes very complicated,
yeah, we talked about Wi-Fi. So, back to the detainees in total.
Hang on one day, I think we have another ICE question.
Okay.
And then we'll go.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering as to why we're putting so much Vermont resources into this. It appears to me that DOC is nothing more than a conduit as a holding station.
Mhm.
What is ICE and or BP doing as far as, should the arresting or detaining agency have more involvement in contacting, making these resources available to these detainees versus we spending state monies on this? And it seems like we're jumping through a lot of hoops for something that, 24 hours, 5 days, and we're spending a lot of resources, money and personnel on something that we're in a contract or an agreement to do just this. So why are we putting so much resources into it?
So they do, to be clear, they do pay a per diem per person rate. So they pay for every individual they bring to us, they pay for that individual. There's a set rate, and I'm sure that if the contract is renegotiated or when it's renegotiated, that'll be factored in. I do think, it is costing the state some money. Much of the resources that we have to bring to bear on it, we have already. So it's not, but we are spending a lot of time working on it. I agree with that. I think the reason that we felt compelled to really step into this space is the concern that if we don't do it, if we're not helping individuals gain access to courts, make sure they have due process, providing them healthcare, they get moved out of the jurisdiction and they don't get those things. So I think there's a lot to kind of unpack there on the resources side. We have worked very closely with the Marshal Service to increase their rates. And so I think hopefully turning to ICE next and saying, okay, this is a big burden and it's expensive to house these folks, how can you help do that? If you want us to provide this service to the federal government, what can the federal government do for us?
Just a quick, so is this a DOC decision or is this a DOC administrative decision to be the bearers of, we want to make sure that they.
Well, you all passed a law saying it's the governor's decision, this last.
Yes.
Yeah,
But you seem to be going above and beyond and providing many more services, which is fine, I guess, of course, but is that a DOC decision to do?
well, I think what we're trying to achieve is providing the same services we would provide anybody else in our system. And ICE detainees haven't had that previously, not just our system, but I just mean across the board, because the immigration law system is different than the criminal law system. The criminal law system has all that infrastructure built into it, and the immigration law system doesn't. And we haven't had to deal with that previously because they've been with us for short periods of time, et cetera. But now that's kind of coming to bear.
How much do we get per day for the federal marshals in our contract, and how much do we get per day for ICE folks?
The ICE rate for the MOU is 180 per diem, and we are actively renegotiating our rate with USFS.
Right, the marshal's contract rate is under negotiation. Hopefully it will be finalized soon. I think it was 135, something like that. Which the government, which the Marshal Service recognized was too low and came to us and said, we need to upwardly adjust the rate.
And just to respond, Senator Norris, to your question about resources and who's being provided what. So in the contract with, it's definitely not with ICE, actually, it's with CBP. It requires that all detainees are held in accordance with all state, local laws, standards, regulations, policies, and court orders that are also consistent with federal law. So typically in Vermont, most of our laws go above and beyond what the federal government requires. And so to the commissioner's point of trying to provide those equitable services, the longer that they're in, typically our detainees acquire more services or obtain more services. And so that probably is why they get scaled up for the immigrant detainees as well. So it's a combination of this contract, but also the requirement of our laws and of the contract to equalize the treatment between all forms of detainment. So long way of saying that's why we bear the cost of that.
So I want to move on from this conversation because we're running late and we've got folks here to talk about the women's facility as well as what's happening with justice involved juveniles and that issue with the gens. So Wendy, you have
Yes.
a question?
How about I summarize the question and we can talk about it at our next meeting or now, if you can. But regarding the detainees, how that graph is going on. I'd like to know more about the details, like are the drivers that folks are staying longer? Are there more people being brought in, getting arrested? What are the factors in that?
I think this is a direct reflection of the court system and the backlog and everything happening. This is like post-COVID, it had dropped significantly and now it's ramping back up to the pre-COVID levels, right? I don't know if it's going to go beyond that. I did try to add, so you see on here, the gray area and the black line, that's a forecasted average annual. So if you'll notice from yesterday, we were above the average because we have seen a steeper increase in detainees, largely driven by state detainees this year compared to other years. And you see that in the graph here, like of a steeper line than some of the other years. And so what I did was I was able to forecast an average to just kind of estimate a year from now, what might we expect to see if everything stays the same? Legislation stays the same, the way the courts are operating. So there's a lot of caveats that make it a little tough to predict. And then the gray bars kind of give you an upper and lower estimate. So, I could be 95% certain that if things stay the same way they are now, that we will have 505 to 571 detainers that are male in our facilities. That would include state detainers, U.S. Marshals, ICE. That's if nothing changes from what it is now, largely driven by state detainers.
Okay, and that is because of the backlog in the courts.
I think so. I mean, there's probably
I think
other
there's-
legislation that has affected it.
A
Yeah.
variety of contributing factors, but yeah, I think that's our best guess
Yeah.
is this is primarily being driven, the courts went to ground and there was very little court activity. The backlog expanded. They've slowly kind of chipped away at that and the system is kind of moving forward, but also society reopened and people are out doing things again and sometimes they're not doing the things that we want.
Okay,
End up
Yeah.
with us. So, I mean, this is the system kind of getting back to its grind.
okay. So then if we could just in the future get numbers for the length of time, that would be helpful.
Like you say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
we've done that before. We can do
Great.
that.
Your average
you.
is about 3 or 4 days. That's your average.
Median, actually, which is the middle number, because average gets skewed for the people who are there a long time, because you can be detained for years or a day, but typically 3 days.
And maybe this will go to the court as well, that I want to understand if the courts are holding people on bail. If they're imposing bail,
Right.
that's not being that.
So
Is it not just the backlog, but are some of the things we put into place and what we hear about repeat offenders and such that courts are holding more people? So that's maybe not just you guys,
Right.
but also we need to hear
But
from.
we can do the bail data request that you asked for and then see if that sheds some light and we can go from there.
You're just the holding area.
That's
All
right.
you are, it's the courts will make the decision who
That's-
goes into corrections, whether they're detained or sentenced. And we see it's nothing to do with that.
So
That's,
I don't want to control your schedule. I have to leave at 12:15. I know you still want to talk about the women's facility. Just putting that out there and
let's keep
let you
going. I
drive.
think you can quickly do this and then it goes into the women's population, which then is a good transition to where we are with replacing the current women's facility.
Quick highlight, just to let you know what you're looking at here. This is the percentage of general population bed usage for the past year for males. This would include for the male counts that kind of provide the numerator of this, includes people out of state or any type of status, right? So it's, again, we're talking about the total male population. And then we divide that by the number of general population beds that we have. And what you see, and this is kind of the reason, this has been the narrative actually prior to COVID, and it's the narrative again. On average, this past year, we've seen 142% usage of male general population beds. Now, we do have more beds than that. I want to just briefly touch on that. There are also specialty beds in our facilities. So some facilities have infirmaries. We have our restrictive housing or segregation units. We have mental health units. We have like aging units. We have like the work camp. But those beds are only used for specific purposes. Some of them may be vacant because we have no one that fits the criteria. And also many of them, except for the mental health and the aging units, are not long-term bed placements. We would never want to keep someone in segregation for their entire sentence, right? So
How many total beds do you have?
general population?
No, I wanted total beds, particularly for males. Let's take the women's facility out, but for males.
I'd have to get that number. I know the general population off the top of my head because that's what drove this. It was
Right, so
912.
912 general population, and I think your overall bed count is about 1,600.
If you
For-
include
well, that's-
out of
That's
state.
all segregation, yeah.
No, I think that's just male. If you wanted to look at just male, we're like 1,400, right?
Then you put in the women, you're at 1,550, 1,600. That's your total. That doesn't include your out-of-state beds. Your
Right.
out-of-state beds are 125 usually. or
Yes, and we have
They're
contract
125 today.
Yeah.
with contracts.
So I think it's really important for folks to remember, in the system itself, there may be a total of, for males, 1,500 beds total for males, but only about 900 of those are general population. With general population means you don't need a specialty bed for mental health. You don't need to be in the infirmary. You're not in close custody. It's your everyday general population. That's what drives how many people will be out of state. That general population bed count is what drives the out of state numbers. So it's really important. And that's going to be really important, folks, to remember when we talk about replacing any correctional facility. Because there'll be different beds for different uses that gets counted into a bed count, overall bed count. But some of those beds are very specific in their use and cannot be used by the general population. So that's something to really keep in mind whenever we're talking about replacing a facility and looking at the number of beds. Does that make sense?
And Chair, just that point, this graph is the reason why we have an out-of-state facility. This is why there are men who are current sentenced individuals in Tallahatchie.
So is it fair to say it's a combination of not having enough general population beds to accommodate folks? But is it also fair to say that with increased detainee populations really puts more pressure on moving folks out of state?
Yes,
Is that also fair to say?
a direct correlation has happened between the detainee population rising and sending more people out of state. Yes.
Questions? So let's go to the women's population.
Yeah.
That will play into what's happening with replacing legitimate facility.
So once again, this is the total female population. So that would include sentenced, detained, and the detained, of course, includes federal detainees and state detainers. Similar trend to the male total population. I also did a little prediction forecast there. We are sitting above what it's forecasting. So right now at 159 and it forecasted a high of 152. But again, this is the average annual. So it's going to be less reflective of just spikes and jumps. And because our population, because we have a unified system, our data are very variable. And so it's doing predictions is tough because it's not like a prison that just has sentenced people and it's pretty stable. And if we move on to, I'm not trying to be fast because of time. We move on to the next one. Again, what's driving our female population increases are detainers, specifically state detainers. And you see a similar looking line that we saw to males for the exact same time period since 2021 here, of the female detainee population on the rise. And it's actually at the point now where we have more females who are detained than who are sentenced. And we've seen it kind of dance, the two lines dance together a little bit. I think Isaac's going to pull up what I'm talking about, but especially in recent years, post-COVID especially, we've seen that detained number, which is the purple, just be higher than even our.
Yeah, so when I started about 4 years ago, I think it was about 40% of our female population were detainees, and that was pretty consistent. Those ratios have remained fairly consistent. And then for a good chunk of time, for about the last year, it was about 50-50, had been running about 50-50. And now we're seeing the detainees today far outpace the sentenced population.
So total incarcerated female right now, which includes detainees. Correct.
Today, it's 159.
159. And I'm trying to recall, what's the bed capacity at the women's facility?
173, I think, is the total capacity.
And what drives that limit is an agreement we have with South Burlington for their water and sewer capacity.
Yeah, because there had been much higher numbers of men in there when it was a male facility. But our operations folks weren't here today, would also tell you that was not ideal. Like, we should not be in a situation where we have those numbers of folks in that building, regardless of what the sewer can handle. The building shouldn't be filling that. Right, anybody.
So just to keep those numbers in mind. And what you're seeing is more pressure coming from detainee situation for that.
And that number, right below the date there, is just the percent change from 2021. So as of yesterday, there was nearly 150% increase in the number of detainees the last 4 years at CRCF Women's Correctional Facility.
Yeah, you go from, 91, that's the total, sorry. Yeah, you go from 35 to 87. almost 3 times.
Well, 2021 was pandemic era.
Right.
Well, just
Coming out.
climbing out of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, that's still, it's been a lot to keep up with.
Yeah.
Again, the most female ICE detainees that we've had in our system is 11. So
Right.
what's really, and again, our kind of total ICE capacity, roughly about 30, it's I think the most we've ever heard.
At one given time.
So
Yeah.
really what's driving this is the state detainees.
Yeah.
And this, of course, will lead into a conversation about what a new women's facility might look like.
Okay, so that's a good segue into the next piece, which is dealing with where are we with replacing the current women's facility, and we have DOC here as well as BGS Building and General Services, as they are the ones who would do the dealing with the land, doing the construction. DOC deals with the overall, what would occur within the new facility. So let's transition.
Yeah, you're not done with me yet, unfortunately, for all involved.
Is anyone gonna come up with BGS at all? You wanna come up now?
Why not?
You both could introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning. I'm Emily Kosicki, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. Commissioner Manoli sends her regrets.
Seeing her.
Oh, she got pulled into other meetings this morning. She wanted to hear.
Right, but we'll connect.
Well, I remain Nick Dimmel, Commissioner. Not much has changed in the last hour and a half.
We do have some documents that were newly posted to our webpage as well as just handed out.
Great.
So I'll leave it to whomever wants to go first.
If you don't mind letting me go first, I might have to dip out, so I don't want to cut you off early. So I think everybody in this room at this point has talked about the replacement of the women's facility now for a few years. This has been a project that's been ongoing between BGS and DOC to replace the Chittenden facility in South Burlington. I'll remind you that facility was built in the late 60s, early 70s as a male detention facility. It's had many iterations, different versions. We've had only males there. We've had only females there. We've had males and females there at the same time. Also not a good model. And the facility, for those who have been, and I know many of you have actually been in that facility, is not up to what we think a correctional facility or any facility should be up to. The facility is old, it's falling down. I could go on and on about the number of problems we have in the facility, but it also just doesn't serve our purposes well. It's not rehabilitative. It doesn't provide the programming space, the mental health, the medical space that we want. And we think that it needs to be replaced, and it needs to be replaced by an entirely different model, a more modern model of what a correctional facility and ideally a reentry facility, something Vermont has never had, could be. And we know from other human services projects that have been completed here in Vermont and other correctional and human services projects that have been completed other places, that there are ways to build a much more therapeutic, purpose-built facility that can serve the needs of those who live and work there a lot better. So we've been on this journey to try to get this work done. From the get-go, this body, the legislature, was very clear that they wanted us to be to bring in as many stakeholders and get different voices into the process and really take a collaborative approach to this project, which we took on in earnest. We did that a variety of different ways, most notably by establishing a stakeholder group that includes a number of stakeholders, both folks who have lived experience, folks who work in the facility, but also our service providers, volunteers, community partners. And so we built this very robust stakeholder group, and they've been helping us through this project for the last at least a couple of years now. I forget when we started it. So that was a great recommendation because we've really taken on a lot of the input, the insights that those folks have provided us, and they've really helped to guide this project forward. I really appreciate that. And we really do have the full spectrum from, correctional officers kind of who have worked in the system a long time all the way through the ACLU, abolition groups, and everything in between. And I think that's been a great effort. I think the hitch in this all comes down to, we finally got to a place where we selected a site, and I'll let BGS talk more about that process because I'm certainly not the expert. And as we began to engage in that process, we really kind of have slowed down. And that's bad for a variety of reasons. One, we know the costs of this facility are going to increase the longer and longer we delay, especially with new kind of inputs in the process, the cost of materials, finding contractors, et cetera. But also folks are languishing in this old decrepit building and we want to move them out to a better environment. So we selected a site, two sites in Essex that are viable. We have a preference for one site that we think would really work well. It's close to the service providers that currently serve the facility. It's close to community hubs where folks could get jobs and find employment. And it's in the corridor where we think that we would have the most kind of participation in our facility. And so we really honed in on this. Aside from, at least on paper, the site looks pretty good. We think that it would serve, it's the size, it's in an area that we like. So we began engaging with the town. That's the enormous piece of paper you have in front of you. I didn't even know we could print on paper this good. But starting in January of 2023, we began engaging with the town. And so for the last 2.5 years or so, we've been trying to move this project forward with the town, and we've really, unfortunately, kind of stalled out. And I get it. I mean, I think human service projects are hard to cite anywhere in the state, but we've gone out of our way to try to highlight to the town how the Chittenden facility actually has been an asset to that community. We have the town manager, the police chief, the fire chief from South Burlington come and testify in front of the Essex town board and speak to their experience and why they think that these projects are so important. The issue really, I think at this point, turns on zoning, and I'll let Emily dig into that. But I guess what I wanted to convey to you is the state really committed to going above and beyond, trying to be open, transparent, try to be collaborative in our approach. We've tried to bring in every stakeholder who was interested in participating in any way, and we've done that, I think, in spades. And now we're stalled. And so the state has kind of done everything that it can to this point to move this project forward, and we're at a bit of an impasse. But I'll let Emily talk about the zoning and we can dig into any questions here.
Sure, and we did have a few slides we could share if the committee's interested in looking at those sites. But, essentially we began this effort after legislation in 2022 that directed us to conduct a land search and submit a proposed site with a preference for state-owned land. And so that site selection led to the identification of 2 parcels in Essex that aligned with DOC siting criteria. And so, thank you, Cole. Those are the addresses. We can just move on to show those 2 parcels, please. This is site 1, approximately 50 acres. There's some unique elements to the property that we can dig into if the committee would like to, and it shows the distance here from South Burlington. So it's, good proximity to the current facility. And then the second site, smaller size, nearby. It's a little bit further from the current site, but again, in Essex, both state-owned parcels. In July 2024, BGS submitted a zoning change request to site the facility and had both parcels as options, knowing we only wanted one site to move forward with, but really just having both options on the table as possibilities. This request has been discussed several times at Planning Commission and public meetings over the past year. However, we've not received a decision to move it forward. And so from the BGS perspective, we've been trying to respond to questions, provide information about the site, but we really haven't been able to move past step 1 to identify which of the two parcels we might be able to engage in deeper site analysis on, because we're still not past that starting line of whether we can move forward from a zoning perspective.
So you would need a zoning change on both sites, site one and site two. That's where the holdup is. And then the town of Essex keeps it. What I'm seeing here on the timeline is there's been public meetings, there's been planning commission meetings, there's been questions that have been asked of the state. In February of this year, BGS submitted zoning request clarification. Because Essex asked for this in January of this year. And then there were some questions that the town of Essex submitted to the state back in April. And BGS and DOC responded to that in May, as well as June. And then the Planning Commission had a meeting a few days ago to address those responses to those questions, but BGS and DOC were not asked to attend that particular meeting.
We were asked not.
Not to attack.
So you have no idea.
That's against public meeting law.
We did listen in, and did listen aware of the conversation. There was, it was clear that there's still some concerns or questions that are on the table. DOC, reached out and offered that we were eager to address any questions that were available, and that we would like an opportunity to appear before the Planning Commission sooner rather than later. So we believe we're on the agenda for the September 11th Planning Commission meeting. And we're hopeful that we'll have a decision one way or another, or some clarity on the path forward after that.
What's the current zoning? I mean, is it like, what's the difference between the current and the proposed zoning that you're looking for? And then are there any, because I don't know zoning law, are there any within the Planning Commission's own, guidelines, rules, procedures, or whatever, timelines by which they should be responding, and or is there any, state law with regard to response to applicants?
I believe it is light commercial, but I am going to ask our project manager, Sabrina, to respond in more detail.
So Essex has a corrections overlay district, which is the area where Woodside was once located. So that precludes any correctional facility in any other zoning district in town. So both sites are split zoning between industrial and residential, one in the identity, one.
So even though there is not a correctional facility on that site where Woodside was, that they haven't changed their zoning. So theoretically, it could be a swap. But they don't seem so inclined. And are there any time frames required or suggested in procedurally or state law about responding to applicants?
I can't answer all of that question as a process. There's not actually a zoning change application process. There's a procedure. The Planning Commission would have to make a recommendation to the select board to approve this request. And each of the boards require at least one public hearing.
So I need some clarity here in terms of swap. So I don't know if you could do a swap because you have a secure mental health facility at the old Woods facility.
That's correct. By the Essex zoning definitions of the corrections overlay, the mental health facility does qualify as.
So you couldn't do a swap for the.
No, the Essex facility, current one qualifies as a correctional facility?
By Essex's zoning definition. The state does not consider it a correctional.
Right, of course.
So that's what confused me when you said a
So
swap.
it'd be creating another one.
You'd be creating another one.
In terms of what Essex thinks they're doing.
And even, so if the town of Essex was to create the ability to site the facility at either site one or site two, that would still have to be approved by the select board?
The select board would need to approve any zone change.
And they would have a public meeting, at least one public meeting.
And you haven't been able to go in there and do any site drawings or any testing to see what would be entailed? What would be needed to upgrade the site until you know you can get in there, correct?
We've done a preliminary site investigation, but we're having to study the funds to do a full site investigation. When right now the answer is no, because it doesn't, overlay.
So the meeting in September will give some more direction in terms of moving ahead or not moving ahead.
That's the hope. That's our hope. That we'll gain some clarity from that meeting. And we'll, as we expressed, we're available preceding that to answer any questions that community members or the planning commission might have.
So when you listened in to the meeting that occurred a few days ago, was there any indication that the answers to their questions that were submitted, did that lead to more questions that the town may have, or they were satisfied with some of the answers?
My impression was that they were not satisfied with some of the answers, that there were additional questions or they felt like more clarity was needed on some of those written responses.
Some of the challenge I think that we get in is a bit of a cart and a horse issue. It's like, they want answers to questions we can't answer until we've done some of the work that we need to do. And we can't do the work until we feel confident that that's a worthy investment of state tax dollars.
You said what I was going to say.
I should have let you say it. Comes with
No,
a
that's okay.
horse.
Or for the horse.
Before the
Whatever.
I think it raises a challenging issue for the state and for state government officials, and I think there's some others in the room who are experiencing similar challenges where we have critical state infrastructure that needs to be cited. And if we get to a place where every town decides that we can't put it there, what does the state do? Our infrastructure is crumbling and people are suffering as a result. Not to mention the fact, and I briefly mentioned it earlier, that these are state tax dollars and they're going less and less far the longer we wait. And so a project that could have been a certain dollar figure is going to be tens of percent higher, maybe 100% higher than that if we continue down this path.
I mean, I think you, Commissioner, raised an important question. I mean, we already have seen this in another community we're going to hear about shortly. And, I think it's important for us to maybe think about how we legislatively deal with the issue. We don't want to mandate certain things, but I think that we also need to think about what are the limitations on a town's authority potentially if there is, if there's certain things that have been met, certain criteria, certain infrastructure issues, and, there would have to be that. But, it's like we can go on and on about this ad nauseum until you find some community that, might be willing. And then is it, is it the best place? Not necessarily, but they said yes. So.
And Representative, you had asked about, timelines for action, and that's something that we've talked a lot about at BGS. And just what is the expected timeline when we do a request like this? Because we've had, 2 instances recently where it has been a year or more. And that's where, if we're not getting clear direction on whether we can go or not go on a particular site, we're then stalling the project without that clarity. At least if we have a no, then we can, figure out an alternative in the next path. So that's where, when it goes on long and we don't know when the end is coming to that process, it can be challenging for us because we're in a standstill.
And does the state have access to environmental court for appeal of a decision?
We believe so, yes.
Yeah.
For the permitting process, yeah, we're not there yet.
I know, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Have to make a decision first.
For zoning, we got Act 250, we got environmental.
Yeah.
But you have to exhaust the administrative process first.
Right, because those are all processes that will have to happen once we know a site is allowable from a zoning perspective. We still have to go through permitting.
Cultural issues are very strong, I think, in different towns. People need to understand, they do want to understand the risk that they're taking as a community. Nevertheless, I think South Burlington has a track record that is pretty open and commendable. So, we'll see what Essex decides.
Other questions on this before we transition to?
Has a question.
Topper?
Yes, thank you. From my experience being on select boards and planning commissions, they do have a time limit to answer questions, or else what you're describing would be happening all over the place. So they do have, at least in my experience, there were time limits for the planning commission or the select board or the zoning commission to get back to people. And listening to the conversation, it appears to me that they're not getting back, but nothing's being done about it, except for that one maybe that you're going to court about.
Good point, Topper, and we're only getting the update from the administration here because we're in the driver's seat for this, and
And maybe you
Maybe
didn't
we ask
hear
the
from
town of
Essex.
Essex to come in.
Well, it's pretty easy. All you got to do is look at their bylaws. I don't know of any time that I was involved that we didn't have a time limit that we had to respond in. So I just bring that up. Maybe we're not responding the way we should
maybe,
because they're not responding and they're getting away with it.
right. Anything else on this before we transition to pretends? I know we're running a little late, but we're gonna keep going and take a shorter lunch break. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good to see you all.
Yeah, awesome. You might still be sitting up there and we are winters.
So on Bob's question, or Representative Clark's question. It says in the rules of procedure and conflict of interest policy of the town of Essex Planning Commission. As the planning commission shall issue a written decision including finding facts and conclusions of the law within 45 days of the date of final public hearing on the application.
Final public hearing
Right.
on the application.
And I have not yet been able to find if there's a restriction on how many hearings or what, so
It's the final,
it's the final
we're
hearing.
not there yet. And that final hearing could be being postponed or
They
extended.
can keep it going for years.
Yeah. So the next update is another construction project that we were working on. It was to replace the old Woodside for shortness. And we were looking at a model of a design build facility where BGS was working with a private developer to build the building according to the needs of the Department of Children and Families for justice involved juveniles. We own the land. We will be leasing the land to the private developer for a length of time. So the developer would build the building and then we would pay rent on that building through our appropriations bill for approximately 20 years, with the option of possibly owning it in the end. The reason that we were looking at a design build model was to take pressure off of the capital bill. Because with building a correctional facility, that would be on the capital bill side. And then on top of that, building a facility for justice involved juveniles would put more pressure on the capital bill, and we don't have that capacity. So that's kind of the background. the state looked at state-owned properties first. That's what the state always does whenever we build any facility or even a courthouse or anything. We always look at state-owned property first. And for this particular situation, for Jens, we own quite a bit of acreage at the Jens, which used to be the week school. And that was the starting point. So I'll turn it over. If you both again could introduce yourself for the record, Emily, as well as Commissioner Winters.
Sure. Thank you. For the record, Chris Winters, Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families. Good afternoon. And I believe the Deputy Commissioner is going to kick off the testimony.
Good morning, Deputy Commissioner Emily Kosicki for the Department of Buildings and General Services. Thank you for that introduction, background about the site. So yes, the parcel that we had been working on over the last few years is a portion of parcel of state-owned land in Virgins. As the chair mentioned, there's quite a large bit of land that the state owns there. Currently, we have an active lease with Northland's Job Corps for a portion of that parcel, including where their buildings are, as well as some space around their school facility. And then we also have a lease, I believe, for a solar panels up there as well. And so that Virgin site was identified through a bid process. Multiple bidders submitted bids to do the construction of the build-to-suit lease development there. A bidder was selected and a contract was entered. It's titled a work agreement to essentially do the design and then build the facility, at which point a lease would be signed, a long-term lease. And as the chair mentioned, there would also be a ground lease of the state-owned land to the developer for that. So there is in Virgins a public use district that covers a portion of the state's parcel, but not the parcel that had been identified for this project. So BGS submitted a request in June 2024 to expand the PUB, the public use district, that would allow us to construct on that portion of the parcel. We then went essentially a full year or just under without action on our request, at which point we withdrew the request in June 2024, approximately a year later. Again, really being at the point where a year had passed without any action on our request. And I will let Commissioner Winters speak to the urgency of the project, but at that point, it didn't appear that the site was viable and that we needed to consider alternatives, including still in Virgins or elsewhere. And we're looking at all options for a new location, but we have not identified one at this point. We did engage with some members of Virgins. There was an ad hoc committee that was formed, and Commissioner Manoli and Commissioner Winters did engage with them to provide information, to answer questions, and try to coordinate and help support a path forward. However, we didn't get to the point of having a hearing or decision on our request.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you all. It's good to be back in the building. No. No, I do just want to say I really appreciate your continued attention and investment in this facility and on these issues and helping DCF advance a critically needed project we're calling the Green Mountain Youth Campus. And just as a little bit of a background and some reminder, this project design includes 2 independent programs. One for, they're both secure treatment, but one being short-term stabilization and the other long-term treatment. Both are served by a common educational, vocational, recreational, and administrative facility. So it's kind of the design. The stabilization program would house up to 8 individuals in the treatment program up to 6, and always with the goal of not having it be at full capacity. So what we're talking about at most is a 14-bed facility that we've been talking about in Virgins. The campus design that we're talking about prioritizes it as a residential environment, a treatment environment, as opposed to an institutional setting. And our goal throughout it is, even though the programs are locked programs, the emphasis is on creating a care environment and not a carceral environment. So, as the deputy commissioner mentioned, this is an urgent need. This would be a permanent solution to the state in supporting the needs of justice-involved youth, replacing the current Red Clover temporary facility that we have in Middlesex, temporary treatment program. A lot of good things are happening at Red Clover. They're doing excellent work with young people, given what they have to work with in the facility. And a number of you have actually been to see that, or a few of you have been to see that facility. And so, while they're doing a really nice job there, they don't have the capacity there. It's a 4-bed program. It's almost always full. It doesn't have the capacity to address the full state need. Nor does it have the infrastructure to put on a program that's appropriate for sustained placements or for treatment. So when we last shared our updates during the legislative session, we acknowledged that there were some challenges on our progress at the identified site in Virgins. At that time, the state had been in discussion with community leaders. We did engage the community leaders there, and we're hopeful that we'd be able to continue to advance that project as planned on the state-owned parcel there, adjacent to the Job Corps campus. And throughout the process, the chosen site was not appropriately zoned for the facility we were trying to build there. So we had requested, as the deputy commissioner said, that they expand the existing public district that did apply to the Northland Job Corps campus to expand that to the site that we were looking at to place the Green Mountain Youth Campus. And last month in June, the state decided to withdraw its request to expand that existing public district in Virgins because they've been declining to take up our request. And just to be clear, that decision doesn't reflect an end to this project, and it doesn't mean that we've ruled out Virgins entirely. It reflects a shift in strategy based on urgency. And as the chair said in the beginning, one reason for doing this as a design build was to relieve pressure on the capital bill. Another is because of the urgency of the project, and we thought we could do this on a quicker timeline. And here we are a year later, where we've lost quite a bit of time on this. So the shift in strategy is based on project urgency. It's based on zoning readiness and our inability to move things forward there in Virgins. I defer to our partners at BGS on this, but rezoning, as you all know, it's a lengthy process. It intersects with local planning priorities. You're hearing some common themes here. To quote Commissioner Demmel, human services projects are hard to cite. It's true for this project. It's been true for others. And we've had many bumps in the road in trying to get to a Woodside replacement. We're fortunate to have the temporary facility in Middlesex, but the permanent one still proves to be quite a challenge. So we're focused now on exploring other sites that are already zoned where we wouldn't have to ask for this kind of zoning change. And where land use pathways might be clearer and more predictable, and where community support might be more amenable. And I know that's never a certain thing, nor is the permitting process, but it's just pretty much quite an uphill climb at the site we are at in Virgins right now. And we have made a lot of good faith efforts to collaborate with the city. I think they've engaged in good faith, and they put in a lot of effort as well in trying to understand the impact on the community. And so, we were hopeful that this would be mutually beneficial. We had a great community meeting about a year ago where there was some opposition, but a lot of support as well. And so we do appreciate the city's engagement and their efforts to try to reflect their community and their community's perspectives and interests. But there's just so many competing priorities, community asks, community opposition, some confusion around the subcommittee, whether there'd be a community vote. There's political dynamics and a lot of procedural complexity. So it just made this so challenging that we thought we needed to pull back and we needed to reassess this site and start looking at other sites. So at this stage, we're open to all options, whether that's in Virgins or whether that might be elsewhere. And we are steadfast in our commitment to getting this done, to identifying a path forward that meets the urgent needs of the system of care and the youth we're trying to serve. We're confident that a lot of the planning and development work that we've already put into this can be transferred to another site. So it's not all effort is lost. And this will continue to be among our highest priorities. So thank you again. I have some folks with me today to help answer questions. Deputy Commissioner Radke of the Family Services Division is present here in the room. And our director of the high-end system of care, Tyler Allen, is joining us online today. So happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
So, obviously the welfare of the kids is paramount. And I know Red Clover is taking care of some of the kids. But so the question is, where are they all? And those who need the higher end care and others, those who are judicially involved and those who are non-judicially involved. How is that going? But where are they? So where are these kids? And how many of them are out of state? What services are they being provided? Are they getting exactly what they need? Just those really general questions, because this is an urgent need. It's been urgent for a long time. And, there's no blame to be thrown out anywhere, maybe on the zoning change, but there really isn't blame. There is concern. So just maybe I'm looking both at Tyler and at Deputy Commissioner Radke.
Let's start with that because that's an excellent question, and I also appreciate your recognizing the urgency of the situation. And you're right, we continue to talk about how critical it is for us to find places for our youth. So right now, as you said, we have Red Clover. We also have a series of other community-based providers like Depot, where we have kids, and there's foster care for youth when that's appropriate as well. And then we do have children out of state. And what I always like to do is to continue to do concurrent planning. So we also are working on opening another smaller facility specifically for youth with mental health concerns. And this would be a semi-secure facility, and that would be in Wyndham to continue to take some pressure off of our highest end system of care. So, and then when there are occasions when we have youth where we aren't able to place them immediately and we're still waiting for placement, we do unfortunately end up staffing those youth in alternative locations. And we work hard to have an independent contractor help us. And we also have an internal group called the CATS team that help us staff. And then very rarely now when we have our family services workers use some staffing as well. And those are intended to only be temporary staffings until we can find a placement for our youth. Tyler, I'm going to look to you in terms of percentages of youth that are currently out of state and anything else you would like to add to that.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And I really appreciate this question. And you were ticking off all the bullet points I had in my head when I heard the question. So that was the kind of menu of services. And I think a short answer to the question is these youths are being served within the community. And to some degree, there's a state of duress that exists in our community-based system of care because of it. So our crisis stabilization network specifically, the programs down at CALL, what we're trying to stand up in Windham County, our alternative setting staffing environments are operating at a high capacity right now. But I say that they're operating with challenging individuals in that care environment for a sustained amount of time. So that's the urgency and the pressure here. It's a little bit of the same story that we've been sharing for years now, that we're trying to serve them as best we can with crisis stabilization programming that is making kind of diligent efforts to increase their clinical models to support longer term care of individuals, but it means they have reduced census, which means they are able to house smaller numbers of youths because there's more acute challenges in there. We also have several youths out of state. I will get the concrete numbers over the course of the testimony. I had to do a short phone a friend for that, but I'll get back to you with those numbers quickly. But we do have several youth out of state, and the Green Mountain Youth Campus would provide a treatment option that would bring the majority of those youth home. Those youth that we would still send out of state would probably, because they have individual markers associated with mental health or treatment needs that exceed the capacity of our generalized design for a 6-bed program. So we do anticipate there would always be some need to maintain contracts with out-of-state PRTF programs. But right now, that's kind of our exclusive option for a resident, for example, at Red Clover, to step outside into an out-of-state program. It would be a PRTF program. So historically, we've had about 8 justice-involved youth out of state. I think the number probably is between 5 and 8 right now, but I'll get a clear answer shortly on that.
Thank you. And I would add, Tyler, I would add also that in addition to Green Mountain Youth Campus being, alleviating having to staff perhaps certain youth out of state, being able to bring them back, it would also help us with this whole staffing alternative sites. We could provide appropriate treatment for these kiddos faster as opposed to having the staff and then hunt and search for appropriate placement. So it's all to really alleviate and provide the better care that we want to provide for these kids.
Lisa and Martin.
Okay. So I have a few questions. So, we've seen in my committee charts over the course of the last few years about, sort of pre-COVID, the number of residential beds available for youth in state, and then post-COVID. And where are we at in terms of moving back? How, what percent of beds that, we have licensed capacity and then we have actual staffed capacity?
Our residential capacity still is about 50% of what it was pre-COVID. Due to all kinds of hiring challenges in our community providers, we simply have not been able to do that much beds. And that's where the problem is.
And so I'm just curious as to what kind of efforts what have we done as a state to try to assist those providers in, recruiting and retaining staff? Or, I know that we have limited ability to increase resources, but I haven't really seen, other than PNMI, I haven't really seen requests to increase, per placement funding in those places.
There have been emergency financial requests that we've approved. And also we had a consultant go into one program really to help them talk to their staff about health and wellness and help them really do more rotation with the folks that they had. And then they were able then to bring in more staff. But since then, I believe recently they've lost 6 staff due to some other incidents. So it's sort of you gain staff and you lose, and it's really a battle where you're just sort of paddling at the surface of the water. Tyler, can you add any additional details as far as how we assist programs?
I can, and I will just, before I lose it, I did get my numbers in. We have 9 delinquent youths out of state right now. 2 of those would be ones that we would consider in the long-term treatment environment, and 3 pending that are imminently going into that type of environment. So my numbers were generally accurate before, but those are the specifics. And apologies, Deputy Commissioner, could you refresh my memory on the question? I had a point, but I lost it when I was looking at my text.
Sure, I was wondering if you could fill in any additional details on what we've done to assist community providers in terms of helping them get staff.
Thank you for that. So one of the thoughts that I'm thinking about is it's not just about the number of beds. We realized when we were sharing that chart initially early on, comparing pre-pandemic to now, that it was becoming a less and less apples to apples comparison. We had Woodside, of course, included in those early numbers. So that was a 30-bed capacity that we, right off the top, that simply doesn't exist right now. So we wanted to make sure it was a fair comparison. The other thing is how we are building up programs. I think the system we're looking to design doesn't need to be a recreation of the system of the past. So we're still looking at the most vulnerable points of the system, which is our crisis stabilization network. And that's what adding in the Windham County program, which will be a 3-bed program, will diversify the population down in Bennington, the CEOL programs, and should give them a lot more space for breathing. I think the challenge right now is you have youth who may be in conflict with one another that we have no choice but to house next to each other in facilities, for example. There's a number of other reasons that those are challenges. So it turns into this more, how do we organize who is where? And the more our attention is on triaging based on most urgent need, the more concern there is about every youth getting what their individualized needs are in the moment. So it's always about trying to figure out how that is. So I think diversifying crisis stabilization has been a priority. And so it's not just about number of overall beds. We have lost some programming over the years for lesser level kind of community-based placements. And one of the challenges we are also facing with is there are certain programs that don't have the capacity to operate over the weekend. So we've been really trying to figure out how can we work with them to expand staffing patterns. Deputy Commissioner said it well. We have approved emergency financial relief requests for those facilities. There's a partnered response coming from the Department of Mental Health, DCF, and Department of Aging and Independent Living, all kind of working together on what are how we're using these programs. Some programs are DCF specific, and so we talk about those a little bit more in these types of meetings, but it is kind of a whole state or whole agency approach to supporting residential programs.
I'll be brief on the next two, and maybe your answers could be a little more succinct. That would be great.
Sorry.
That's okay, just because other people have questions as well. So is the Windham County the sheriff's building location? Okay, so we've been hearing about this. This is year 3. And so like, what the heck is the holdup is what I really want to know. And the second is, I know it's the 3rd year. And since we have BGS and DCF in the building, you both can, shoot back at each other. And then I just am curious if one of the sites in your effort to shift in strategy based upon urgency is a permanent facility in Middlesex.
I would say to your last question, Representative, all options are on the table. So we're gonna be looking at anything that's available to us, we'll certainly consider. I don't think we have any specific designs in Middlesex. It's certainly not the buildings that are there.
No, I'm not talking about the buildings. Yeah.
You're talking about the.
I'm just talking about the site, and while I recognize it's not ideal from a community perspective, it's no sidewalks, there's no, there's limited employment opportunities, but it is close to Waterbury and Montpelier and other communities. So
I would just say, generally speaking, I think we're looking at a bigger site with
a bigger footprint.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's going on with the sheriffs?
Just a couple of things that and others can fill in, but there have been contract issues with the sheriff. So it took us a while to negotiate a contract there for the building and for the space. And then BGS can speak to some of the construction and design and the length of time it took there. And I'll also say that we're still looking to get a provider up and running, although I don't know that the construction is quite complete. We are very close. BGS can speak to that. And then we're hopeful to have a provider ready to provide services on site in the very near future. So those are a couple of the delays. But
when will construction be complete?
We should be substantially.
Who's paying? Is it BGS's budget or is it DCF?
DCF, I believe. Yeah.
What is it?
DCF.
And so do you have an RFP out for services, a service provider?
We have put a couple of RFPs out on that. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
We have, it was RFPs that we did not have any successful bidders, but we're in negotiations with another. Very positive negotiations, so really hopeful to get this up and running really soon.
And how many bids?
This will be 3 bids.
3 bids. Okay, Martin and then Topper.
So I know that South Burlington and Virgins were like 2 of the top possibilities, and I'm wondering if South Burlington is still in the running for that, and if so, I certainly would be happy to support that and help in any way. And I know the rest of the South Burlington representatives are very much behind that. Yeah, so it's the senator, yeah. So I don't know if that's still that option even continues to be open, or if that closed.
I think all options are open. It's still under consideration. That's one of the ones that we would look at for sure, given that we've already had a proposal there. And I just want to say thank you for your support. We need a community, and we need the representatives of that community to really get behind this, and the fact that you understand the need and kind of understand what the actual impact is versus some of the speculation that happens when we try to go to a community could be really, really helpful to a project there.
Topper?
Yes. I have one question. And I guess the deputy commissioner is probably who I'm going to direct it to. The timeline to again identify properties to build a facility to deal with this population appropriately. What is your timeline to do this? I keep hearing that it's real important, et cetera, et cetera. So what's your timeline to identify those properties? And another interesting thing is, I just heard you say that South Burlington is still on the table. I heard you earlier say we've decided not to pursue that anymore. So which is it?
Representative, the one that we are not pursuing anymore is the existing site in Virgins because of the zoning issue. We're still reconsidering any option at this point, whether it's in Virgins or it could be in South Burlington or it could be in some other community. We're looking at state-owned properties. We're just reassessing all around what our next steps are, and we'll have a path forward soon. And originally, this was about a year ago, we were hopeful that it was a 2-year timeline. I think we would still be on at least a 2-year timeline from this point forward.
A 2-year timeline to identify properties?
No, sir, for the whole project.
Have it up and running, have the property
Okay,
work.
well, before we get to the project itself and get it up and running, you were talking about you're looking to identify other properties right now.
We are,
So I want to know when are you going to stop looking for properties so that we can work on them?
yes.
The facility.
Yes, we are all hands on deck at both BGS and DCF. We're working very closely on the next steps, like actively working on that process. We're in close communication weekly, if not multiple times a week, on that site analysis next step. So we just, it was in June that we withdrew in Virgins, and we decided to regroup. We've been putting all efforts, and I would say the timeline is ASAP. We are, hoping that this is a short-term pivot, or not. We're hoping that it's a quick pivot rather than a long-term process, because this is, as the commissioner said, we recognize the urgency. And so when it became clear that this parcel in Virgins wasn't moving forward, that's when we decided to regroup. And so it's hard for me to say with specificity exactly how long it'll take to land on a new site. We made the decision in June to regroup, and that's what we're putting all of our efforts towards right now.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. I just hope we're not back here next year saying the same thing. We're still looking for a place.
Me too.
This has been going on for years. I know that's already been mentioned, but
think that relays, that sums up all of our feelings. Let's hope we're not here next year at the same spot.
So we have lunch coming up, so I'm not going to ask a big question, but a really short question. And maybe you could help me understand at some point, maybe we need to ask the judiciary this question. So how are judiciary judges' hands tied with this sort of, this real backlog? It becomes a backlog, becomes a stopping block. Just seems, what is there that judiciary can do to facilitate this process? And I'll just ask that question, don't need to answer it, but I'm thinking there might be something that our judicial system can impose on some of us to move forward. I'm not thinking about us particularly, but others. We need to move forward, and if every single town continues to say no, we are in real trouble. Sincerely in trouble. Not a lot of kids, it really isn't. And the whole point is that what you are proposing, what we are all proposing together solves problems. And the problems that are affecting communities are what they want to avoid. Well, they can avoid it if these facilities are put in place, or a single facility is put in place. Doesn't end it.
And these are folks who are under state custody, and we have a responsibility. Anything else? Because we are running over, and we do have to take lunch. We do have a whole different item for this afternoon. Anything else? Thank you both for coming in, and keep us posted, and we'll make sure you keep us posted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll be on future agendas.
So we're due to come back at 1 o'clock. Could we come back at 1:15? Would that impact you at all then for your presentation for pretrial supervision? Okay, let's get off of live, and we will be back at